welcome to Bookpods. Imagine being 17 years old, right?
Yeah.
And stepping into a classroom for the very first time in your entire life.
Which is already wild to think about.
Right. And you have to honestly ask your history professor what the word Holocaust means.
Wow.
Just because you've genuinely never heard of it. And your professor stares at you. The entire lecture hall goes dead silent, and everyone thinks you're making this monstrous anti-Semitic joke.
That is just, it's an incredibly jarring scenario to put yourself in.
But you aren't joking. You just literally have no idea what happened in Europe during World War II.
Yeah, and most of us, we take our baseline reality completely for granted. We just assume this foundational level of shared knowledge because it's reinforced by everything around us.
Right, like our schools, the media, the doctors we visit, our peers.
Exactly.
So today, we are looking at a stack of incredibly insightful reviews and literary analyses to unpack a story where that shared baseline simply did not exist.
It wasn't there at all.
No. We are diving into the best-selling memoir, Educated, by Tara Westover, and our mission today is to explore how one woman went from a completely off-the-grid childhood with zero formal schooling in rural Idaho to eventually earning a PhD from Cambridge University.
But we aren't just tracing an academic resume here. We are examining the true cost of that trajectory.
Right.
Because the price Tara paid to forge her own independent mind was unimaginably steep. It required completely dismantling the only reality she had ever known.
And I want to promise you, the listener, even if you have never lived off the grid or, been completely isolated from modern society, this story is going to make you look at your own family dynamics.
Absolutely.
Your own assumptions, and the sheer privilege of a normal education in a completely new light. So let's establish the foundation.
Let's do it.
Tara was born at home, at the base of a mountain in Idaho that her family called the Princess.
And when we say she was born at home, we mean completely outside the system.
Yeah, she had no birth certificate.
None. For years, the state of Idaho essentially had no official record that she was even alive.
It's wild. And the family was a Mormon survivalist family, but
Right.
it's critical to understand that this was driven by her father's highly specific fundamentalist interpretation of his faith.
Right. We're impartially reporting on the father's specific beliefs here. He was a deeply entrenched doomsday prepper.
Right.
He believed that the government, public schools, and the medical system were all fundamentally dangerous, corrupt, and often linked to the Illuminati.
Yeah, he literally stockpiled thousands of gallons of fuel underground, preparing for the days of abomination.
It's essentially like growing up inside a biodome where the oxygen mix is entirely controlled by one person.
Yes, that's exactly it. But wait, I'm stuck on something right out of the gate here.
What's that?
If her father was so paranoid about the government that he wouldn't even get her a birth certificate, how does she ever get access to the ACTs later on?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Or a passport to go to the UK? Wouldn't engaging with standardized testing immediately put her on the grid he was terrified of?
That was a massive point of friction. Getting a delayed certificate of birth years after the fact requires affidavits, trying to track down whatever obscure records exist.
Like what?
Like a baptismal date or an immunization record, which of course she didn't have. She had to piece together her own legal existence as a teenager.
Wow.
And that friction really highlights the core dysfunction of the household. Tara didn't just lack historical facts, she lacked a reliable narrator for her own life.
She didn't even know her actual birthday for certain, right?
Exactly. And later in life, Tara comes to this crucial realization. Her father likely suffered from undiagnosed bipolar disorder.
Oh, wow. That shifts the entire dynamic of the story.
Completely.
It means the family wasn't just following a strict religious doctrine. They were essentially being held hostage by untreated mental illness.
Yeah, when you view his behavior through the lens of bipolar disorder, the extreme fluctuations make sense. During his manic episodes, his paranoia about the government and the end of the world just spiked.
And so the family would be dragged into this fever pitch of survivalism.
Right. Canning peaches, burying fuel. But when he hit a depressive episode, the household plunged into darkness and neglect. The reality of that house fluctuated entirely based on his neurochemistry.
That sounds exhausting. And that untreated paranoia didn't just, stay trapped in his head. It manifested physically in the yard outside their window.
Oh, definitely.
Because he didn't trust society, the kids couldn't just sit inside reading. They became child laborers.
Yeah, instead of learning fractions, they were subjected to brutal, highly dangerous manual labor in the father's scrapyard.
So the term homeschooling is completely inadequate for her situation.
Completely. I mean, there were some books in the house, but they were largely ignored. The priority was always the scrapyard.
And working with heavy machinery as an unsupervised child inevitably leads to catastrophic accidents.
But remember, the fathers rule doctors and hospitals are agents of the government and the Illuminati.
Right, so extreme injuries were treated exclusively with the mother's herbal tinctures and homeopathic remedies.
Because she operated as an unlicensed midwife and herbalist?
The descriptions of these injuries in the sources are genuinely harrowing. There is an instance where one of Tara's sisters is in a severe car crash and suffers a traumatic brain injury.
It's so hard to read.
Instead of calling an ambulance, she is brought home and left in a dark basement room. She develops raccoon eyes.
Which is a classic clinical sign of a basal skull fracture.
And agonizing migraines. They just waited it out in the dark.
Yeah, and it wasn't limited to the children either. The father himself suffers horrific, life-threatening burns in an explosion at the scrapyard.
Oh, God.
He is peeling skin off his body in unimaginable agony, and he still refuses to go to a hospital. He relies entirely on his wife's salves.
The psychological impact on a child watching her parents normalize that level of preventable suffering is profound. It teaches you that your physical pain does not matter.
Which brings us to the psychological danger inside the house, which was arguably worse than the scrapyard.
You mean with her brother?
Yes. Tara's older brother, Sean, was violently abusive. He attacked her physically, dragging her by her hair, and verbally decimated her.
Right. He would falsely accuse Tara of being a whore, of having a reputation around town.
And the tragic irony is that Tara was so sheltered, she hadn't even kissed a boy.
She barely knew what the accusations meant.
Exactly, yet she internalized the shame completely.
But the most damaging part of Sean's abuse wasn't just the physical violence, right? It was the parents' complicity.
Yes. By refusing to intervene, the parents reinforced the hierarchy. It signaled to Tara that her safety was secondary to protecting the family's insular structure and her brother's authority.
But here's the thing that makes my head spin. The father's rules weren't even absolute.
No, they weren't.
There were instances where the mother's herbalism or midwifery completely failed, and someone was literally on the brink of death. Suddenly, despite constantly preaching that whatever happened was God's will, they would quietly rush to the hospital.
Yeah.
How on earth did they justify these random exceptions when things got truly desperate? I mean, if modern medicine is evil, how do you just casually use it on a Tuesday?
You're hitting on the exact mechanism of authoritarian control. The hypocrisy wasn't a flaw in the father's system. The hypocrisy was a defining feature of the abuse.
Oh, that makes sense.
If rules are based on a stable theology, you can learn how to follow them. But when rules constantly shift based entirely on the father's arbitrary interpretations, it keeps everyone perpetually off balance.
You can never perfectly obey because the law changes without warning. That instability is terrifying.
It ensures you never trust your own judgment because only the leader knows what the rule is today.
Wow. But that constant whiplash is also what eventually forces Tara to look for an exit.
Yeah, she sees a glimmer of possibility when her older brother, Tyler, manages to study enough to get into college.
He plants the seed that there is a world outside Buck's Peak.
And acting on that seed requires an unbelievable amount of cognitive endurance. Tara essentially teaches herself enough grammar and mathematics, starting from absolute scratch, to take the ACT.
The sheer cognitive load of trying to conceptualize algebra when you have no foundational math education is staggering.
It really is. But she scores high enough to be admitted to Brigham Young University.
Which is an incredible feat.
Yeah.
But getting the acceptance letter is just the prologue to a massive psychological shock. Moving to Provo, Utah might not sound like moving to a chaotic metropolis, but to Tara, stepping onto the BYU campus was like landing on Mars.
Oh, absolutely. She is absolutely astonished by her roommates.
They wear shirts that show their shoulders, they shop on Sundays.
They drink Diet Coke, they watch movies.
To a secular listener, those seem like trivial lifestyle differences.
But we have to understand the stakes for Tara. She was raised to believe those specific actions were deep sins that corrupted the soul and invited the apocalypse.
So witnessing her roommates casually doing these things without being struck down by lightning was deeply jarring. It created intense cognitive dissonance.
It's like she was dropped onto a new planet and had to learn how to breathe the air while simultaneously passing college-level courses.
And the academic gap was devastating. This is where we get back to that moment in the history class.
Right.
She raises her hand to honestly ask a question about a word in the textbook. She asks what the Holocaust was.
The reaction from the professor and the students was one of disgust, assuming she was a Holocaust denier or a troll.
But she literally did not know.
No, she didn't.
How does someone recover from that kind of public humiliation? It wasn't just an embarrassing moment. It was a realization that the entirety of world history had been hidden from her.
That moment is the first major crack in her father's omniscience. If he omitted the systematic murder of 6 million people from her understanding of the world, what else was he wrong about?
Exactly.
But the struggle at BYU wasn't merely academic catch-up. The much heavier burden was the moral conflict.
Right, because every new fact she learned, every step she took toward normality, like taking a painkiller for an earache instead of an herbal tincture, felt like a betrayal of her family.
She experiences this crippling guilt because when your family has tied your eternal salvation to their specific extreme way of living, choosing to live differently feels like choosing damnation.
Going to a real doctor isn't just healthcare, it's a sin.
She is constantly agonizing over whether her expanding mind means her soul is becoming corrupted. It takes years for her to untangle the difference between acquiring objective knowledge and losing her moral compass.
But she doesn't break. She actually excels.
She does.
She pushes through the culture shock, she masters the academics, and she wins a research opportunity at Cambridge University in the UK.
Which means she crosses the ocean, which her father had explicitly warned her against, claiming he wouldn't be able to rescue her when the end of the world came.
But at Cambridge, she begins a formal deconstruction of her childhood. She studies feminism. She reads Mary Wollstonecraft and John Stuart Mill.
She starts to dismantle the radical beliefs she was raised with regarding female submission and intellectual inferiority.
She finally begins to find a sense of belonging in the academic world.
The trajectory is almost impossible to comprehend. She goes from a scrapyard in Idaho to a visiting fellowship at Harvard University.
Yeah. And there is a quote from Tara that I think perfectly encapsulates the mechanism of this transformation. She says, "I began to experience the most powerful advantage of money, the ability to think of things besides money."
That observation cuts right to the core of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Let's explore that, because I think people often romanticize poverty or view education purely as a matter of willpower. But she is talking about physiological bandwidth, right?
Exactly. When you are living in a scrapyard, navigating a violently abusive brother, and waiting for the government to raid your compound, your brain's bandwidth is operating at 100% capacity, just trying to survive the afternoon.
Right.
You cannot ponder the nuances of 18th century philosophy when you are worried about having your skull fractured by heavy machinery. Education and the financial stability of scholarships finally gave her the mental luxury of intellectual curiosity.
True education requires a baseline of physical and psychological safety.
But acquiring that intellectual independence triggers the ultimate climax of her relationship with her family.
Yeah, while she is at Harvard, her parents come to visit her dorm. And this isn't a proud parental check-in to see where their daughter studies.
No.
It is an aggressive, calculated attempt to rip her out of her new reality. Her father essentially tells her that she has been corrupted by the secular world and is being controlled by Satan.
He offers to give her a priesthood blessing right there in the dorm room to cast out her worldliness.
Why Harvard, though? Why choose that specific moment when she is at the pinnacle of her academic achievement to force this issue?
Because Harvard represents the absolute apex of the intellectual, secular establishment that her father views as the enemy. It is the antithesis of the mountain. He recognizes that she is slipping entirely out of his sphere of influence.
Wow.
The blessing sounds like a religious ritual, but it is actually a profound psychological lever of control. He is demanding that she verbally and spiritually submit to his authority in the very center of her new world.
The stakes of that moment are chilling. If she accepts the blessing, she is allowed to stay in the family. She retains the love of her parents. She gets to keep her home.
Right.
But it means completely surrendering to his twisted reality. It means admitting that her education, her independence, and her own perception of her brother's abuse were all delusions planted by the devil.
It is the ultimate double bind. Choose your family and lose your mind, or choose your own mind and lose your family. It requires her to either annihilate her own selfhood or accept permanent exile from the people who raised her.
She refuses the blessing. She chooses her mind. And the fallout is devastating.
Yeah, it is not a triumphant Hollywood walk away where she feels empowered and instantly liberated.
Not at all. She suffers a massive mental breakdown. The somatic symptoms of that cognitive dissonance, nearly destroy her.
She almost fails her PhD thesis because the emotional toll of severing that foundational bond is so heavy.
Tearing away the foundation of your reality, even if that foundation was toxic, is a physiological trauma.
But she finds the endurance to push through. She finishes her thesis, she earns her doctorate in history from Cambridge, and she accepts the permanent estrangement from her parents.
Though she does manage to maintain relationships with some extended family members who left the mountain.
To synthesize the thematic core of this entire journey, one of the reviews highlighted two incredibly poignant quotes from the book that I think really land the plane.
What's the first one?
The first is, "You can love someone and still choose to say goodbye to them."
That single sentence dismantles the toxic idea that family loyalty must be unconditional, even in the face of abuse.
It is the ultimate tragedy of her story, but also the source of her greatest strength. She realizes she doesn't have to hate her father or stop loving her mother to recognize that they are fundamentally unsafe for her to be around.
You can grieve the loss of a parent who is still alive because you prioritize your own survival.
Exactly. And the second quote is the closing thought of the entire memoir. She writes, "You could call this selfhood many things. I call it an education."
That redefines the entire premise of the book. True education wasn't just getting degrees from Cambridge and Harvard.
It wasn't about learning historical dates or passing standardized math tests. Education was the painful, courageous act of forging her own independent mind.
It was the agonizing process of learning how to perceive reality through her own eyes rather than through the distorted lens she was handed at birth.
What an incredible journey we've unpacked today. We traced a path from a dangerous scrapyard in rural Idaho, a child with no birth certificate treating horrific injuries with herbs, to the prestigious halls of Cambridge University.
It is a testament to the transformational power of intellectual independence and the immense, almost incomprehensible bravery required to break toxic generational cycles.
It really challenges all of us to reflect on our own environments. How often do you take your access to basic, objective information for granted?
Seriously.
How often do you overlook the immense privilege of your formal schooling or even your basic independence to just go to a doctor or read a book without the fear of spiritual damnation or physical retaliation?
It is so easy to forget that the solid ground most of us walk on was paved by access to shared knowledge. And that brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today.
Okay.
We all grow up inheriting the reality of our parents or our hometowns or our specific cultural bubbles. We all start off inside some version of a sealed ecosystem.
Yeah, we do.
But if the reality you were raised in was fundamentally flawed, if your foundation was built on distorted glass, what would be your Holocaust moment in a classroom? What undeniable, shocking truth would it take for you to finally realize the world you were given wasn't the actual world at all?